Sounds great.
So it looks like we could probably go ahead and get started. So, Willie, I'd like to welcome you to ITAD Talk, and this is going to be one of our first live broadcast. And so to give you some introduction, it brings out that you are one of the first 5 Microsoft authorized refurbishers, or MAR for short. And that since then you've delivered over 100,000 refurbished PCs to schools, not-for-profit organizations, into homes of at-risk children and businesses. And you're also a conference founder of the ERC for short, or Electronic Reuse Conference, that was started in 2004. And you had co-authored 9 academic papers on sustainability and used electronics. The first publication was in 2015, and you also submitted 4 additional full conference papers. And one last point, that your grandfather had been on the board of John Deere for over 30 years. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about your background?
Well, kind of a fun story about my grandfather. During his career at John Deere and in the industry, he had over 150 patents. 31 of them were associated with the manure spreader, and some people think it went genetic. So there you go.
Okay, great. All right. So I guess maybe we'll just move on to our first slide. Okay. So why does the right to repair matter financially for me?
What we want to make sure when we're working on the issue of right to repair, and when I say we, I'm wearing my hat as a member of the Repair Association, or more commonly known as repair.org. What we're really working on is we want to make sure that there is a competitive post-sale repair market that isn't dominated or controlled by the original equipment manufacturer, but indeed that you can go to someone you trust or know and get your product repaired, and really have that kind of local relationship. The other thing that's kind of nice about it is all repair is local. So you're creating local jobs when you're repairing. And so one of the things that might be really important for you to look at as you buy something new is the question of, is it repaired out in your community? And if it is, then the likelihood of your investment that you're making in whatever product you've got is going to be a longer life. So kind of the quick way to say that is, don't buy it unless it can be repaired.
Okay. And then another question, why does being able to repair devices have any significant environmental impact?
Well, when we talk about electronics, it's important to understand that 80% of the life cycle carbon investment that you make in a device that is in a device is when you make the device. 20% is over the use of the product, and 80% is when you're making it. So if you can use that product longer, that investment that we've made in that device, that carbon investment, can go a much longer way. So that's the environmental portion of this. Also, too, is if you are continuing to use and not necessarily cycling through and disposing of, et cetera, you are actually using less materials. And so I think that's enormously valuable, especially given the conversation and the events of the last few weeks and how it's becoming clearer and clearer that there are some real effects that are happening with regards to climate change.
Okay. And then why is this a case of personal rights and liberty? Isn't it their product?
Well, it's a really good question. And we in the US have a long tradition of ownership. Um, and when you look back about 100 years ago, when all of this was really coming to the fore in the legal circles, it's got kind of a name called antitrust.
Hmm.
And basically, what it said is if you sell someone a product, you cannot demand after the sale that they continue to buy from you. And that's known as tying. So, yes, manufacturers should have the option to do it, but not necessarily the only option being the original equipment manufacturer.
Okay.
And there's been a recent case where Kodak, in their photocopiers, tried to program the photocopiers so that only Kodak toner cartridges could be used. And that was clearly determined by the Supreme Court to be a tying episode and therefore illegal.
Got it. Okay, let's move to our next slide. And then the question would be, how did this right to repair thing get started?
Well, the way I started on right to repair was really working with Kyle Wiens at iFixit. He and I had known each other from working together on the electronic reuse conference, and I just love his website. And if any of your viewers have never seen it, run, don't walk. It is a remarkable tool, and he's done a remarkable job of being able to give you the kind of information that you need to repair today's electronics. And so he called me up and said, hey, by the way, your state representative in Illinois is the chairman of a committee that the bill of right to repair in Illinois is on. Can you go talk to him? So I said, sure, that's kind of fun. I like to lobby anyways. So I go and I'm talking to my representative, and he is espousing all of the lines that manufacturers use to justify why I should not be able to fix something that I own. And I got to say, it got under my skin that my representative, who I count on in the legislature to represent me, was talking about how he wanted to protect corporations going forward. He and I have gone around on this for, about 4 or 5 years now. And back then, when I first started with him, it was kind of like, why are you talking to us? It doesn't matter. But now, given the number of stories and the people are starting to understand the concept that I bought it, I own it, I can do with it what I want. Now, mind you, if I bought an Apple iPhone 13 and I used it as a hammer, that's a bad on me. But nevertheless, it's my product, and there's no way Apple should be able to tell me that I can't use it as a hammer. So that's obviously a ridiculous scenario. But it kind of makes the point is, wait a minute. Who are you, manufacturer of the product, to tell me what I can do with it?
So how does John Deere relate to the right to repair movement?
So John Deere has implemented a system of software locks where if you replace certain parts, like in a combine, a moisture meter, and the moisture meter happens to be a slightly different version from the one that you're replacing, but they're compatible, you'll need a new piece of software from not the dealer, but from John Deere. And in order to get that piece of software, you have to tell them what the serial number of the device that part is going into, what the serial number of that part is, and they'll be able to look up in their database who the owner of that device is and make a determination as to whether they're going to send you that particular file through the technician of the dealer, yes, but only as a conduit. So it's a really interesting structure. And what that clearly has demonstrated is a decrease in the availability of repair, the decrease in the cycle time of repair, and a significant increase in the cost of repair. Now, from John Deere's point of view, hey, it's increased our revenue. Isn't this great? Of course it is for you, but that's not how we do business in the US. We are fundamentally a competitive society. And if you create an environment where you have if you have an inappropriate, let's call it, competitive advantage, we don't like that.
All right, so another question: how does Apple fit into the right to repair movement?
Well, Apple does some of the same things. Apple, for example, on their iPhone 13 has serialized their cameras so that only a certain camera can go into a certain phone. So those two serial numbers have to match up. And that's a problem if you want to go to your independent repair guy over, down the street, as it were, and he doesn't have the software that can match up those things, then that makes that repair tied to Apple. Yeah, now, one thing that was interesting a couple of years ago, there was this process where people who had their phones independently repaired, and they downloaded a software upgrade, and the repair worked fine, by the way. And they downloaded a software upgrade. When the next time they turned on their phone, Apple had detected that it was repaired by an independent repair shop, and they threw up an error called error 53.
One sec.
And what they discovered, what happened with error 53 was that your phone was bricked. So because Apple could determine that you went to an independent repair person, they could then shut down the use of your phone.
Wow.
That's a huge problem for me. I want the ability to go down the street because, heck, if I take my phone into the Apple store and they take it behind or down into the basement or wherever it goes, and I have to wait and twiddle my thumbs in their showroom, I have no idea what this guy is doing with my phone and whether he's taking my data or not or any of those kind of things. I'd much rather go to my guy down the street who I may know and say, hey, do it for me. I want to work with someone that I know.
All right. So another question, the term planned obsolescence gets thrown around a lot. Could you elaborate on what that means for anyone who hasn't heard of it before?
Yeah, the term planned obsolescence is really this notion that the products that we seem to be buying these days aren't lasting as long as they possibly could. And a lot of that has to do with the software, that just eventually the software breaks down much quicker or is more fragile, if you will, than the actual physical device. A really good case in point is refrigerators. Refrigerators are now, are becoming smart. And so what's happening is, they're putting in software, but the life expectancy of refrigerators these days has gone down from, maybe 2 decades ago being about 20 years you could count on using a refrigerator, to now somewhere around 7 years.
Yeah.
So that's really the problem. Now, oftentimes when people use the phrase planned obsolescence, there's an implied kind of maliciousness by the company. I don't want to ascribe to that routine, that concept at all. But I will say that the evidence, i.e., 20 years to 7 years, is there, and things are becoming obsolete quicker than they used to, or maybe even more quickly than they should be. And that's the important concept here to get is, what can we do as consumers and how we buy and what we demand from our manufacturers? How can we get the products that we want and get a full value of the investment we have, but also keep companies like Apple innovating and innovating and innovating? So it's an interesting dynamic, and it's one that I think if we are rigorous in allowing a competitive environment to exist, we will do better and better with it.
So, okay, we got the third slide up. What are some of the ongoing legislative and lobbying efforts? And what if the manufacturer says they'll repair it for us?
Okay, let's talk legislative first. Well, now let me pick back up to, we'll repair it. Manufacturer saying we'll repair it for you. That's fine. And oftentimes people will choose that. Just like lots of people go back to your car dealer because that's where you want your car fixed. But it's also some people, lots of people, choose to get their car fixed by their independent mechanic. I know my independent mechanic, Oscar. I trust Oscar. I trust Oscar to tell me if I need something or if I don't. When I go to the dealer, I'm never quite sure. So it's fine that they want to, but my objection is requiring that they're the only ones to do it. Now, legislation. In 2021, there were 41 bills in 27 states that were introduced on some element of right to repair, whether it was agricultural right to repair, whether it was any electronics right to repair, whether it was medical, all of those kinds of things. And we're working through, as anybody who's ever worked on trying to get a bill passed, notwithstanding your 8th grade civics class, it's hard work. Yes, the steps are very clear, but boy, it's hard work to get it through. And
so since you bring that up, what are some of the ways right to repair has gotten pushback so far?
Well, one of the things is the pushback that right to repair has gotten in legislative hearings has mostly been about, well, we built this, we own the intellectual property, we're not going to let you do what you want with what you own because we built it. And the analogy I like to use is, yes, you have a copyright to a book if you're the author, but you can't tell the person who bought that book that they can't write in the margins or highlight your text. In other words, yes, you can copy it and produce it and be the one who sells it because you own the rights to the copyright or the patents, but you can't tell me what I can do with it afterwards. And I don't blame people like John Deere who are hungry for more profit every quarter to want to try to control it. I'm just saying is within our society, we're a competitive society. We know that competition works. So we want to get back to a competitive society where people are on a level playing field.
So a question that plays right into that is like with Tesla, aren't they just selling you the hardware and disclosing that they still own the software? So if you buy it, isn't that just a free market that's functioning?
Well, interestingly enough, yes, they own the rights to the software, but you have a license to use it. Okay. And so as long as you are using it, that's fine. But for them to say how you can use it, how it can drive your car, and the functionality of the car, that's a different story. And then we get into the whole issue of subscription versus perpetual license, and it gets really murky in there. And again, I'm going to come back to is I want to be able to make a choice. I don't want to say that I want to exclude any of those possibilities. I just want to include the possibility that I can make my own decision and I'm not subject to what they're doing.
Okay, and then what are some of the biggest wins that the movement has gotten thus far?
Oh my gosh. I think it's 2 weeks ago now, Apple, which had been fighting vigorously in all of the state legislatures and hiring lobbyists everywhere we went, they announced a 180-degree turnaround. And in January, they're going to start a self-repair program where you can order your own parts. And if you want, you can repair your own Apple phone with your own with genuine Apple parts.
Wow.
And in my mind, that's a perfect solution. Now, frankly, we're going to have to see how the implementation of the program goes. My suspicion is we're going to have to nudge them a little bit further down the road and kind of have them open up on that. But you've seen recently, Dell has just made an announcement. Microsoft has just made a self-repair announcement. There's going to be many, many more technology companies that are going to jump on this bandwagon because, quite frankly, it's a competitive advantage right now to say, hey, wait a minute. I've got a great product and I want my customers to be able to get a full value from what they invested in that product of mine.
Okay, so what is the story with France repairability score?
So one of the things that France is trying to do with their repairability score is let you know at the time of purchase how repairable that device is. You'll remember earlier on I talked about don't buy it if you can't buy it used or if it can't be repaired. So that's kind of the idea here. And they worked very closely with our friends at iFixit, and they developed a set of metrics. And so you get a score from 1 to 10 on how fixable it is. Now, there are some devices that have a very low score, a 1. And there are some devices that have a very high score of like 8 or 9. So as a consumer, if you're thinking, boy, I'm really going to want to keep this for a long time, and I want to make sure that if like a battery goes out, batteries are typically in your cell phones, batteries are typically good for 1,000 cycles. So that's about 3 years. So I, being as cheap as I am, used my last cell phone for 5 years. So I had to get a battery replacement. And it worked out well for me, and I know how to do it and all those kind of things. So that was good. Also, too, when I get a new cell phone, I hate the process of transferring the data, losing some of your passwords, getting the applications that didn't make it over, the new ones versus the old ones, making sure all the data. I mean, it's just like, oh my God, it's a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah, I had the same thing when I got the new 13. A lot of the passwords didn't transfer over, and you had to go in and reset all that. So it's a tedious process.
Yeah.
So what did Australia do that's made them notable for the movement?
Well, two things. Number one, when Apple's Air 53 came up, they and their consumer agency investigated it and found that Apple had violated their consumer laws and fined them. So it was a rigorous investigation that ended up in resulting in a fine, and also Apple then requiring to take away that Error 53. The other thing that Australia has done, which is absolutely brilliant, is their productivity commission is equivalent to our Federal Trade Commission here. And they've written a massive report on the concept of right to repair in all different kinds of areas. And they've really nailed it and gone into real detail as to why it's important. Individual owners of individual products should have the right to repair.
Okay. So our next question, which goes with slide number 4, consumer electronics gets a lot of the focus for right to repair, but could you explain a bit about the agricultural right to repair?
Sure. And by the way, agriculture is really close to my heart. My grandfather, who worked at a place, as we used to say in the family, where they used a lot of green paint, whereas my dad worked in a place where they used a lot of red paint, meaning International Harvester. So, very close to my heart. Both of them very successful engineers in their careers. But what's happened in the last 10, 15 years, tractors have become, or the implements of farm equipment have become computerized. And it's almost, I think you could almost say there's no food unless you have the data. Very interesting how that transformation has happened. And you see it in a couple of interesting ways. So one of the really interesting things that's starting to happen now is that old used farm equipment is selling for exceedingly high prices. I remember a friend of mine was talking this past weekend about his dad, who bought a tractor that's now about 25 years old. He bought it for $1,000 used. He recently got an offer for that same tractor for $25,000.
Really?
Yeah. The market is insane right now. So, and the other thing is because John Deere has this system of what they call payload files, which is, think of it as a lock and key system, but the only people who have the key is John Deere and Moline. And so you can imagine that in order to access that key to get that particular part working on your system, it's going to be expensive.
So a question that probably will go along with what you're about to say is, what does this mean for the individual farmers, and how much of a challenge does this represent for them?
Well, over 90% of farmers or farm land that is farmed in the U.S. is done in a family farm environment. So pretty small guys that probably don't have a huge asset base, and they probably don't have a high margin. Farming is traditionally a very low margin business, somewhere around 3% gross or 3% profits. So anything that you're taking away from them is a big issue. Also, too, is agriculture has very tight windows for planting, harvesting, and any of the other procedures that need to be done to the field. And if you're down for 1 or 2 days or 3 days or maybe even longer, that can have a serious impact on your bringing in the harvest that time. And farmers and ranchers, they're a pretty tough bunch, but boy, don't mess with their harvester planning.
So what would it mean if the agricultural right to repair in John Deere's issues are allowed to continue or accelerate?
Well, first of all, is profitability for the average profitability for all producers, farmers and ranchers, would continue to decline. In the last decade, um, agriculture is the only industry where technology has been introduced that the profit margins have generally declined. And they've generally declined at about a 1% compounded interest rate. I don't know about you, but running a business with 3% gross, 3% margin or profitability, you can't do that very long. Number one. Number two is even relatively small disruption of the economies or harvesting could have huge effects on food. A pretty classical supply demand curve issue here. And globally, we're actually seeing it because the harvest in Brazil and Western China is very poor this past season. And what you'll see in commodity pricing on food is extremely high pricing or relatively high pricing for the commodities that are coming out.
So as we move to slide 5, what are the differences between the agricultural right to repair and the electronics right to repair? And I might mention too that if you have any, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the question box, and we'll do a question and answer here in just a few minutes.
Yeah, it's so interesting. While the net result, the equipment, I mean, or it's the difference is my cell phone versus $1 million combine, that looks like a whole different thing, but it's all fundamentally the same issue. It's control by software of a product that I own. That's the differences for all of them. It's all about the electronics and it's all about the software introductions that are happening.
Okay. And then, so what are some of the places or resources that people can use to learn more?
Well, repair.org is a great website, easy to use, and it'll allow you to participate in many ways. One, if you don't mind, maybe even just $5, become a member of repair.org. We'd love to have you join us. Number one. Number two is you can, through the site, select your state and send a message to your individual representatives, your member of your House, the Senate, and you can send them a blurb through the website that says, hey, I'm a voter and I support the notion of right to repair. You could also go to the iFixit website and just become a good DIY fixer. Every once in a while during the summer, I'll just literally put a little tent out the end of my driveway and have people drive by and drop off stuff that's fixed to fix. I just enjoy fixing things because in the end of the day, if you've got something broken and you got something fixed, it's like I got something done. Yay.
And for anybody that's interested, I did an interview with Kyle Wiens of iFixit. So it's probably maybe split up into 3 segments, probably about 30 minutes or 35 minutes or so. It's a very interesting, he talks about I believe it was 85,000 web pages they have repairing everything from a cell phone to a vacuum and so on. And they sell all the parts and tools that are necessary to make the repairs. So let's take our last question is, are there any approaching dates or deadlines that people should know about?
Yeah, what's really important is state legislatures get almost all of their work done in the first 2 quarters of the year. So as soon as Christmas is over, run, don't walk, to your state representative, to your state senator, and say, wait, what's the right to repair bill in your state? Do you support it? What questions do you have? And you will be surprised. 2 things. One, is just by listening to this 30, 40-minute webinar, you'll know a lot of stuff and you'll be able to really talk to them about it, number one. And number two is they'll want to hear from you.
Great. Okay. So I guess we'll go ahead and take a look at our questions.
Sure. Let me just say
Sure.
one thing is if you're in agriculture and you've got a repair horror story, please tell it to me. And you'll see on the screen right now, you see my email address. This is my personal email address. I'm appealing to you personally to send it to me or send me a note and say, hey, Willie, call me. Here's my phone number. I want to tell you my story. Because the more stories that we get like this of real people having real problems in state after state, in district after district, that's going to be valuable for us to get this legislation passed.
Okay. All right. And so we'll go ahead and have, for the questions, we'll have our producer, Jeremy Schaller, read off the questions.
The first question comes from William, and he asked, it seems like the electronics movement is going well. Do you see a lot of hope for those of us in agriculture? And then I think there was a typo here on the end, but he said something about John Deere, and it's been a while.
I'm going to read between the lines in that question because first of all, William, you got a great name. Second of all, what I love about that question is it's kind of a round the barn kind of a question. And I'm going to assume a couple of things. I'm going to say them out loud. William, you're not saying this, but I'm saying it, is in the world of agriculture where John Deere is so big, you do not want to mess with them because they can really mess up your operation. So with that kind of as a context, yes, I think we're going to get some huge movement in 2022 on this whole issue of John Deere's dominance. And I would even call it abuse of the agricultural industry. In a less public environment, I sometimes refer to John Deere as a cancer on agriculture. And I say that very specifically because it seems that they're getting their tentacles into everything and they seem to be kind of sucking out the life here and there, whether it's repair, whether it's equipment, whether it's data. It's just amazing to me how deeply they've gotten embedded. And I worry, quite frankly, if they go much further than they are now, it's not going to be good for the industry.
So the next question comes from Robert, and he said, if they're already at 3%, how long would it be until the system has to change?
Oh, Robert, thanks for your question. I think what you're hearing right now, in the very Midwestern way, mind you, we're not the East Coast where, someone would come up and kind of get in your face about it. But here in the Midwest, we're kind of polite and quiet. But boy, when the door's closed or when I'm just talking to my friends, you get an earful. So I think it has to happen right now. And we need all of the effort and all of the support that people can give us, notwithstanding, I understand you may not want to have your name associated with your story of repair hell. That's okay. We just need real stories and we need to be able to tell them. And that's why I'm inviting you to email me directly at williecade@gmail.com. By the way, it's a really easy email address. It's just my name @gmail.com.
The third question comes from Adam, and he said, how should I donate? Are there some states or super PACs, I think is how that's pronounced, that would be better to donate to than others?
Um, donate through the state you're in. So here's what you do. You go to the repair.org site, you go to your state, and you become and you fill out your request to your elected officials, and then you can donate what you feel comfortable with at repair.org. And we promise we take a really close look at whose membership is in which state, and we allocate our money accordingly.
Fourth question comes from Jess, and she said, are you hiring or bringing people on to the team at repair.org?
Oh, great question. I wish we were. Repair.org is a volunteer organization. It's run all by volunteers, which is amazing considering how much work we've gotten done. Now, each of us have some connection to the industry, and yes, there is a long-term benefit for us, but we're not actually getting paid for our advocacy. This is a work of real passion, and we really want to be able to look at our neighbors in the eye and say, we tried to help you with that one. We think your ownership of products is important.
Sorry, I couldn't hit the mute button there for a sec. This next question comes from, and I'm sorry if I butcher this, Kobe, and he asked, Jeff, this one's for you, Jeff. How does ITAD fit into the right to repair movement?
It kind of has a big impact because the ITAD companies will collect a lot of the used assets from corporate America. So they're tasked with, first of all, making sure that there's no data on those devices that could have credit card information or medical information and so on. But secondly, some of the material does come in damaged. So if those items could be repaired and resold, then once again, that's going to, as Willie mentioned, there's so much energy involved in creating a new product. So if we can extend the life of an old product, it's going to be a lot better use of that, the energy sources and the sustainability and the circular economy, which is kind of one of the buzzwords. So,
the last question comes from Gary, and he asks, "Are you guys going to do a update event or like a progress event kind of thing in some months? It's like the kind of the."
Well, as Jeff is pretty well aware, is if he wants me to come back and talk about what's happening in another time period, I'm happy to be here. And by the way, Jeff, I just want to say thanks to you and the people at Exit for your work and making this available to us. It is the way that we're getting the word out about what right to repair is and how it's important. So thank you so much for making this opportunity available.
Right, and I was just going to mention too that there's another podcast I have on ITAD Talk from Billy Johnson, and he's one of the lobbyists for ISRI, and he's also working on the right to repair, the legislation going through also. So if you wanted to get some more information, that's another source. You could listen to his podcast, and he lists a few of the resources also. And Willie, I want to thank you for being our guest, and also thank Jeremy Schaller for helping us with the production of our broadcast. And thank you everybody that's was here to listen to us, and we really appreciate it. If you have any suggestions for future topics that you would like, we'd be interested in hearing that also. And so I just want to say thank you.
And this broadcast, if you didn't get to join until some part through it, it will be posted on our YouTube channel at Exit Technologies sometime in the next couple days here.
Great. All right. Thank you.